If the way you've been living no longer feels sustainable for you, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's not because something's wrong with the world. It's because the rules you've been following no longer match who you are. And what that means is the way you believe reality works, how success happens, how safety is built, how life responds to you is changing. Welcome. This is Leading with Spirit, the show for the spiritual guide who knows there's more. More depth, more truth, more realness in the work you're here to do. Whether you're a healer, coach, or intuitive, this podcast helps you reconnect with your gifts, trust your path, and lead from soul, not stress. Hosted by me, Spirit Bird. I'm a master shaman, best-selling author, and founder of Holton Healing Arts. My intention is that each episode brings grounded insight into spiritual growth, energy mastery, and the real-life journey of walking as a spiritual leader. You can find me at Spirit Bird Official. Enjoy the show. The framework you've been using your whole life, the framework you've been using to understand how life works, that itself is cracking, and something deeper is asking to take its place. And when this mismatch gets big enough, life starts to feel heavy. Decisions get harder. Things that used to make sense start to drain you. You're tired all the time. You're having trouble finding your footing. You can't explain yourself. You feel lonely. You feel like you're the only one. You're second guessing yourself all the time. Everything just feels heavy. That mismatch is what people are really talking about when they're talking about moving from the 3D to the 5D. And most people are not walking around thinking about this. Most people aren't walking around thinking about, wow, I really want to get to the 5D. But you might relate to this. You might be thinking about why you feel tired all the time, why decisions feel heavy, why even doing the right thing sometimes still feels like off. Because you can have a job and responsibilities and people who rely on you and a full calendar and still feel like you're living like slightly out of your own life. And you can also be, open and with lots of time and plenty of resources and doing what felt like your soul work and also still feel like you're performing some kind of version of you that like makes sense instead of actually being what feels true, And you might notice it in small ways, like, again, that career that looks fine on paper or that like used to feel like what you dreamed of, but doesn't quite feel right anymore. Or the decision that you know is right, but feels like it's the irresponsible decision. Or the rest you desperately need keeps like postponing until everything is handled or you're all caught up or you're ahead. It can also feel like the truth that you kind of like swallow or like hold because saying it would just complicate things and you just don't have the time for that. That like quiet tension so many of us carry is not just stress. It's often the beginning of a transformative spiritual experience, which we'll have multiple of these in our life, by the way. And it's where the way you've been making decisions or your framework no longer matches what you deeply, deeply know to be true, but typically are either denying or afraid to admit to yourself or afraid to admit to the world. So this is where the conversation about moving from 3D to 5D actually matters. And I want to break it down, all of that for you today. And it's not because when you hear people talking about going to 5D, especially if you're not particularly woo, I hear you, your first instinct is like, what the fuck even is that? Or people are just trying to escape, or, it's a bunch of imagination, but it's not because you're trying to escape. And it's not because you want to be more spiritual, but because the shift that I'm talking about changes how you make everyday decisions, how you relate to work, to money, to relationships, to rest, to trusting your intuition spiritually in real life, in the 3D life, right? Most of us call real life the 3D life. So for many, this is what a spiritual awakening actually looks like. You're shifting from that old way of how you think the world works into a new way. And for a lot of us, it is dramatic, but for most of us, it's quiet, it's confronting, and it's like weirdly practical as far as how it shows up in your daily life. So today we're going to talk about what this shift really is, why it feels so destabilizing at first, and then how to work with it in real life. So let me just start with when people say 3D, again, typically we're talking about the physical world, the ordinary reality, what everybody else just calls reality. It's like the physical component of it. But beyond the physical component of it, it's also a set of constructs of kind of like laws and agreements we've agreed collectively to live inside of. Some of those agreements are logic as the highest authority, security before alignment, proof before trust, survival first, soul second, and being responsible in a way that, the system or the collective defines as responsibility. For example, having a certain amount in your retirement, having a certain amount of food stored, having certain connections set up, like those kinds of things that we generally agree with is what keeps us safe. So these are not just abstract ideas, right? They shape how you make decisions in your daily life. They shape what you believe is possible. They shape what you feel safe to want. You can be deeply intuitive, loving, spiritually aware, and still run your entire life from these constructs. And that's why people often feel split and heavy, because their inner knowing says one thing, that like subtle voice within the feeling in your body that knows the right move. But when it confronts these constructs, it gets your choices, your instincts get filtered through fear, logic, what makes more sense, what's more practical. I lived inside these very deeply at one point in my life, and then I broke free from them. And then I lived on the other extreme for a while where I just kind of rejected all of these constructs. Neither of those, I would say, was the 5D. And then there was a shift. And that's something that I would consider to be really that transformative spiritual experience. And this has happened multiple times in my life. So I want to talk a little bit about like what that looked like and felt like. There was a period where I was like incredibly broke, right? I was working constantly. I was hustling nonstop. And no matter how much money came in, it was gone just as fast. And I wasn't being lazy and I wasn't being irresponsible. I was just trying to survive. And it got to a point where I remember at one point I was seriously looking at donating bone marrow for cash. Like it was just like I just couldn't get caught up. And in this situation, I've been a vegetarian for years, so my iron tends to run a little bit on the low side. It's always healthy, but it's on the low end. And I remember distinctly like realizing, oh no, I might not even be able to donate the bone marrow because I'm going to need to have a higher iron count, and trying to figure out the cheapest way to boost my iron that would make it cost effective for me to get money donating. Right? Like that's the literal situation that I was navigating. But also, that was my mindset. In my consciousness, in my construct, I was being run by how can I make this work? What's the fastest way to come up with what I need? Everything costs. Everything costs so much. Every opportunity takes more than it gives. This was the 3D survival logic really at its extreme. It's like being at the mercy of that old logic. And honestly, like beyond the financial stress, that was only a little part of it, right? Because it was the emotional and the mental burden of all of that. My brain was constantly running, looking for extra gigs, trying to pull things together, always bracing, knowing there was a part of me that knew it's not really supposed to be like this, right? But also it seems like it is like this though. So nothing felt good. At some point, I realized that while I couldn't like instantly change my circumstances, I could change the state I was operating from. And at the time, it wasn't like from a manifesting way. It wasn't like, oh, I just need to change my mindset. It was like I started to realize that the way my brain was thinking was just as, if not more exhausting than the circumstances themselves. So I started doing something really, really simple. I started by focusing on feeling safe in my body. That can be a lot of things. Some people talk about nervous system regulation. That really wasn't where I was at. It was more of an energetic place for me at the time. So I did a lot of daily, I wouldn't even call them meditations, but daily times of intentional focus on feeling and being in my root chakra. Focus and attention on receiving and letting myself feel open to support. And you know what? I started to feel better. And then something else started to happen. Little tiny shifts. They were tiny, but they were real. They were very 3D. I remember I was traveling at the time, and again, like super, super broke, like barely making it from point A to point B of where I needed to be, really scrounging up food, not a lot of extra resources. And I was in a place that was cold. And I remember finally finding a pile of firewood that somebody had left like in the wood. It was like on the side of the road. It probably fell off somebody's truck and stopped and like broke for that wood. And I remember that moment of seeing it and being like, wow, it's such a small thing, but this is what I was asking for. You know, I was asking for help and asking for support and trying to be open to receive. And that firewood actually just made a huge difference. Not but like a couple weeks later, I remember saying at one point that I, at some point, want to get a pair of shower shoes because I was traveling a bunch and I didn't like going into like public showers barefoot, but I didn't really have any shoes that could get wet. And I said out loud how nice it would be to have shower shoes. And lo and behold, I find a pair just left, I think it was in a parking lot that were like my size and looked fairly clean, you know, enough that I could clean them and feel comfortable wearing them. So those weren't coincidences and they weren't dramatic miracles, right? They weren't like, oh, I've been rescued from the ills of the world. They were just signs of support of the light of the universe showing me, oh yeah, you're supported here. Here, you need this, you need this. So what was changing wasn't my bank account yet, but what was changing was my relationship to life. And I was moving out of this trapped feeling of like everything costs and I'm so tired of money into like, oh, I'm allowed to receive. I'm allowed to be supported. In fact, I am supported. And that was the very beginning of that shift into the 5D. And by 5D, not like love as a concept, right? If we're talking about 3D being the physical world, most of the time when people talk about 5D, they think of it as this state of love, which is true, but it's not love as a concept. It's more like trust as a lived state of being. And there's some discernment there because it's not just about like, oh, everything is whatever's supposed to happen is supposed to happen. That's a distortion. There's a very big distortion in the world, right? One of like pushing, trying to force everything. That's a wound. That's a distortion things feel heavy, things feel hard. But there's also a very big distortion, especially for people that identify as spiritual, as like, oh, if it requires effort, or if it's not easy, or if I have to stretch myself, must not be aligned, which is also a really big distortion and a really big wound. So the move into what most people call the 5D is not about being positive or being spiritual enough. It's not about having to increase your vibration so you just like magically appear in the 5D. It's not that the 5D is like this different, completely different world that we ascend to. It's about no longer being governed by the 3D constructs. Logic first, safety first, practicality first. And that's terrifying because it means making decisions that don't make quote unquote sense according to 3D logic, according to what we've been taught, the rules that we used to agree with. And this is where that real fear actually lives. The freedom people say they want is usually framed in 3D terms. And I mean, I've worked with thousands of clients at this point, and it's been true for me. It's true for most of them. We want more money or more time or a better system, like better government, right? Different leaders. And it's not that I'm saying we ignore the 3D. It's not that I'm saying none of that matters. Like those things definitely help, but it's not actually the thing that's restricting you. And getting that, getting the money, getting the time, getting the different leaders is also not what's going to free you. What feels like a cage is not just your circumstances. It's the invisible rules you've been using to define what is safe and what is allowed. That's what's heavy. That's what's hard. That's what's coming up for you, is the mismatch between those old rules and what you actually know in your soul is true. And it's also the scariest jump to make. I saw this again when I wanted to do a program that felt like deeply aligned to me. It was like a training program. It was super mystical. I just really felt my soul speaking. I was so excited about the opportunity. It was with somebody I really admired and respected. And I remember her opening it up and offering it. And I remember my initial thought was like, oh, so I was still traveling. So I was a little bit better off than when the firewood was saving me, but I did not have extra at all, right? I was just kind of getting by. And so my mind said, maybe the next time she offers it, I'll do it. I know, I'll save up the money so that when she offers it next time, I'll be ready. But I also knew myself. I knew that even though I'm an okay saver, if I had to save that amount, it was a big investment for me, especially. It was a big investment for people that were, resourced. It was especially a big investment for me. So I knew that if I had to save that amount every month, I probably never would. Each month I would come up with a reason why I can't. I'll start saving it next month. Something else would come up, get in the way. And I realized like, oh, the difference between me pre-saving that amount versus just saying yes and figuring out how to make that amount every month, it's exactly the same. If I need to save it versus just making the payment is literally the same thing. The only difference is me saving the amount, which is quote unquote safe, got to remove me from the commitment. I wouldn't have to actually commit to the thing. Agreeing to do it would require that I actually do the thing, show up, find a way to make the money, and actually get to do this program I wanted to do. So at the time, the only place, again, I was stretched pretty thin, but I also know this is like a part of the 3D to 5D is like, I'll probably do a whole nother podcast on this at some point, but like money is not black and white like that. It's not just like we think numbers are that literal, but money is not the same as money, as numbers. But at the time I was like, okay, well, let me try to play with this. the only place that I could find at the time was to create like space and to ease up on the payment bills a little bit was I had this car payment. And for me at the time, the payment was far higher than I needed, especially for that. I didn't need that kind of vehicle. I actually barely used the car at that point. I did a lot when I first bought it, but not then. I was underwater on it, which was difficult, and selling felt like it would be impossible. Like, how the heck am I gonna find somebody in this like remote place that I'm living that will, not only want to buy this car for top dollar, but I still owe money on it. So go to the bank with me and like pay that money through the bank so that we can transfer the title to them. Like it seemed really complicated. But within within a couple of weeks it moved. So what happened is I wanted to join this program. I felt that soul urge. I knew it was the right choice to join the program. I then started to evaluate from 3D logic. This doesn't make sense. Maybe I'll just save up and do it next time. That's the more responsible thing to do. Then I realized this is what we'd call the 4D, like the bridge. Then I realized that actually trying to save that amount every month would be the exact same effort as me making that payment every month for the course. So I decided I'm going to sign up for the program. I'm going to put my car up for sale. I'm going to figure out a way. That was my thinking, right? Within 2 weeks, someone appeared out of nowhere who wanted not like just, it wasn't even just that they needed a car and were willing to do it. They were specifically looking for this model of car in this color. They were willing to go to the bank with me and handle all the complicated paperwork. He certainly could have found a better deal somewhere else, but he wanted this car. And had I waited to feel safe first, I don't know if that door would have opened. I mean, maybe, but I don't know that I even would have tried to sell the car. I don't know if that person would have appeared. What happened, my experience of what happened is that I was able to make that leap through my decision. And the leap itself, the decision itself is that I'm doing this rather than what's the safest, most practical way to do this is what created that bridge. So this is where a lot of people get confused. Again, moving into the 5D doesn't mean that daily life disappears. When a lot of us think of it, we think of you probably like imagine this like magical like panacea, this like fantastical or mystical world where everything's just like perfect. That's not quite what the 5D is. You still might work. You still might pay bills. You still might make practical decisions on a day-to-day date basis. The difference is that you're no longer psychologically constrained by those things. You're no longer psychologically constrained by the work, by the decisions, by the bills, by the systems that we used to agree is what runs everything. I saw this recently, actually, in my partner. He was completely overwhelmed with his schedule. He just got into one of those spots where no matter how organized he tried to be, like things just kept piling up. Like it was relatable, right? And like every productivity tool, it like helped a little bit, but nothing really shifted the core problem. It just seemed like it was too much, like he would never be able to catch up. And I finally said, like take a break, go do something fun. And after being after him for a couple weeks, finally he did like break and he said, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna go take 2 hours. And he went and enjoyed himself instead of trying to catch up on a schedule that was designed to never be caught up on. And you know what? The shift was immediate. The rest of the week, he still had, commitments. There were still things that he had to show up for, but it was like magic. He was no longer overwhelmed by the schedule. And shortly after that, like within a day, his schedule like cleared. And it's almost unexplainable because again, it's not like the obligations he had before disappeared. It was all of the heaviness and the construct that he was operating from that cleared. The logic that said push harder, the soul that said rest and the mismatch between the two. So that choice, that little choice, changed everything. So another place that this is going to show up for you, you might see this in identity and voice. I was tracking back, trying to think of a good example of where this has shown up. And I grew up in a pretty conservative community. My spiritual experiences were definitely dismissed often. So for a long time, I just kept that part of me quiet. I assumed, like I got trained to assume that people look at me like I'm crazy or judge me or reject me. So my I was looking at a move and my logic said, "Oh, I should live somewhere that's more open-minded. Once I'm in somewhere that's more open-minded, then I can be myself. I can be free because I don't have to restrict saying my ideas and saying what's true for me." But instead, I ended up moving to a small town. And since I didn't think that it was probably going to be this like really open-minded place, I knew that I had to make an internal decision. My internal decision to stop hiding, to stop waiting for me to have to see someone who's open-minded to feel like my voice could be free. So I made that internal decision to stop hiding, to share what's true, and from a clean place. So not that I'm trying to convince everyone to believe me or to agree with me. I'm not trying to prove anything, right? Like I'm just being honest about my experience. And what happened really surprised me. I met there's like two specific occasions that came to mind. Like I met people who I assumed would not understand at all, including on these two different occasions they happened to be former police officers, who I ended up having like deeply open conversations with about spirituality, intuition, and experiences that they actually hadn't shared very often with other people. And also during that exchange, I got to have a totally different perspective on them, on their world, what I understood their life to be. And it was such a beautiful, both of these were such beautiful teachings because it showed me that people's reaction was less about like their reaction and more about my beliefs. And also showed me that how deep connections how deep connections can be, how quickly they can happen when you just stay open from that clean place. And I think had I waited for the world to show me it was safe by surrounding me by people that I thought would agree with me, that those conversations never would have happened, right? Like that is 5D trust in action. But the clearest example that I could think of around this topic and that movement, because for me it was like one of the most triggering, was leaving a long-term relationship. At the time, I was living in a pretty expensive city, and definitely staying in the relationship felt safer financially. Not to mention, like, it wasn't like toxic, or it wasn't like a really bad relationship. So there was every reason to not leave. Leaving felt terrifying between like having to navigate feeling like I was the bad guy and, breaking my partner's heart and breaking my heart. I also had those 3D practical things. Like, where was I going to live? How would I afford this? Like, I don't even know what I'll do. So logic said, maybe you should stay. But alignment, everything else in my soul said, no, leaving is the right choice. So I followed my heart. And this is what's so interesting is after the breakup, he moved out. I remember like thinking, I'm gonna have to move. I remember like looking at apartments, looking at rooms that I could rent. Wasn't really my ideal, but that was the only thing I would be able to do to afford a place. Was to probably move in with somebody. So I was like scouring the internet for roommates and like what could be affordable but still feel nice to me. And I just held this sense that I am taken care of, and that I can trust my heart and my soul in this moment. And so after the breakup, it had never occurred to me, first of all, that he would move out. Like I just assumed I would be the one that would have to move, right? But I ended up staying in this apartment that I loved. Now, the downside was that basically meant that my rent doubled because we were splitting it. So I didn't really know how I'd manage it, but it was like, okay, well, at least I have a month to figure this out. And within that month, I get a text from a friend of mine who's telling me about a program that covered rent for people under a certain income level. And it was something kind of high. It was like 70,000, like if you made under $70,000, they would just pay your rent for a year. What? I'd never heard of anything like that. Did it exist before I made my decision? Yeah, it probably existed, but would I have found it if I had stayed? Would I have like made the decision? Would all of those pieces come together that way? I don't know, maybe. It doesn't matter because it showed me something really important. That when you use that logic, that rational mind to perceive possibility, and logic's not bad, right? But it's just one way our brain works. It's just one form of thinking. When you only use that to perceive possibility, you cut off entire fields of support and experiences. Okay, there's one more piece I want to name here because it's a huge part of why so many people feel overwhelmed right now. It's not just the uncertainty of the world, it's the sheer volume of what we're aware of, right? Like the world isn't really not different than it's always been. What's changed is the volume of what we're aware of. And I mean in two sides. The volume being like we're just exposed to a lot more, like we have more access to news and media and coverage. And also like our awareness is growing. So we're also aware of feelings and energy and like relationship dynamics and what things mean. So all of that, they're all sitting in our consciousness. And on top of it, a lot of the news and information we are getting, depending on, where you get your media, what you focus on, is like a lot more about suffering. There's more awareness around health and nervous system and trauma and food and sleep and movement, purpose and relationships and productivity. So there's also all this pressure of how you should be, how to optimize, right? How to be healthy, how to heal. There's always something else you could be doing, something else you should know, right? And probably something else that you feel like you're not quite doing right. So a lot of us end up with this like quiet panic of like, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. Give me the system, give me the tool. How do I fit all of this into the small amount of time and energy that I have? How do I fit, taking care of my health and taking care of my mental state and taking care of my actual family and going to work or building my business or navigating the work dynamics and also like wanting to make a difference in the world and also like trying to be environmental and also, like, right, all of those things. And so most of us have this thought, like, how do I fit all of that stuff together into this finite amount of time and energy that I have? But the question itself, that question of how do I fit it into my small amount of time, is coming from the same 3D framework that I've been talking about. That old set of rules and agreements that we've been operating from. That's where that question comes from. Because the issue is not that you need a better way to manage everything. The issue is you're trying to manage things you were never meant to carry. Okay, and I don't mean that by like the world itself and the systems itself, the way our capitalism works or the government works, or, like your situation at work functions. Like, I don't mean that like the system stacked against you. I mean, you're choosing to carry things in your life that don't fit you. Because you're not supposed to fit everything into your schedule. You're supposed to discover what doesn't belong there. in your schedule, in your consciousness, in what you're carrying. So much of what exhausts us is not essential. We do things out of habit, out of guilt, out of pressure, out of fear of falling behind, right? Like, how much comes to mind and what does your body do when you think of falling behind? There's a lot happening just in that little thought, right? There's a lot of exhaustion and pressure that also comes from saying yes to things that are misaligned but familiar. Feels comforting, but it's actually misaligned. And so, even just your awareness of subtly knowing that that's true is a lot of extra energy. So, from a 5D perspective, life is not asking you to do everything, to figure out how to do and be everything. It's asking you to listen for what is actually yours. And when you start listening, your life does not get smaller, it gets clearer. You stop doing things because you feel obligated. You stop reacting to every signal or urgency. You stop trying to keep up with a pace that isn't designed for your nervous system. This is why so many tools and systems don't work long term. They're designed to help you cope with the overload, not question why you're overloaded in the first place, and also not get stuck in the trap of trying to figure out what external thing is causing the overload. And again, I'm not saying that means everything in the world is okay and we should accept systems that don't work for us. But I'm saying there's a difference between finding where you're going into agreement of accepting the overload versus blaming something else for putting the load on you. And if this is something you really struggle with, if your mind's constantly trying to catch up, if your body feels stretched thin all of the time, by the way, I just created something really cool for this. This is why I created the emotional reset. So just a quick plug for that. This is an awesome tool for you that'll help pop you out of that. Starting day one, 7-day tools, quick, easy, not a lot of intellectual information, not super long practices, just like show up, drop in. You're going to have a completely different emotional experience. And I know we often say there's no magic pill, but honestly, this reset is the closest thing I've seen to that. And when many people actually do it, actually apply it, it clears all of that noise like almost immediately. But this is what I'm talking about today. It's not because it gives you like more practices to add to your list, but because it's going to help you release what you're not supposed to be holding. Just let it go. It doesn't ask you to add anything. This move helps you subtract. It's the subtraction that allows that alignment to return. The moment you stop trying to manage everything, trying to fit everything in and be everything and carry it all, then you can finally hear what life is asking specifically of you, where you're actually meant to show up. It's not avoidance, it's not bypassing, it's clarity. That clarity is what allows the 5D to move through your real life, everyday life, instead of feeling like it's something separate from it, instead of feeling like it's a place that you need to get to, instead of feeling like if you get the right formula of perfect vibration and mindset and life systems, then you will get there. If we get the perfect combination of food and government and honesty, like then we'll get there. It's not like that. It's about allowing it to move through you. So moving from the 5D, moving from the 3D, to the 5D is not about being more magical. It's about becoming more obedient to your deepest knowing. It's about becoming more obedient to your deepest knowing than to the old structure that taught you how to survive. Yes, it's scary. Yes, you're probably going to feel like you're crazy. Yes, people are going to reflect back to you that there's things that don't feel practical, right? And at the same time, you're still going to do 3D things. You're still going to have to make phone calls and send emails and go to bed earlier or handle paperwork. But what's going to shift for you when you're making those decisions from that 5D flow, from what's actually soul aligned instead of this old construct, right? All you're doing is unplugging from that old construct and plugging in to a different construct and being open to letting life lead you that way. So when you do make decisions from this place, you're going to do them from trust instead of control. And when you're doing these ordinary life things, you're also going to be doing them from trust instead of control. And many of us are right at the edge right now. We can feel that leap. You're going to feel that hesitation hit, and that edge, that hesitation, that tension that lives right there on the spot, that's the doorway. And every time you choose alignment over fear, and start in small ways, even small ways are sometimes more powerful. Every time you do that, you're going to step further into the life your soul's been trying to live all along. That's the shift. That's what I wanted you to leave with today. But that's the way. So I'd love to hear how this lands from you. I'd love to hear if you can think of a time where this was true for you. And even if you don't, write me and tell me, that's fine. If there's any to do for you here, is I want you to think of at least one time that you had a choice and it felt scary. You didn't know how it was going to work out. You didn't know what was going to happen, or you feared retaliations, anything like that. When you made that choice, but you knew it was the right thing to do. You knew it was soul aligned and it worked out. Because if you need proof, that's your proof. That is the exact example of living from the 5D. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed the show, would you subscribe and leave us a review? Let us know you did at Spirit Bird Official. We love to support our listeners. And if you enjoyed the show, please share it with someone else who would also enjoy it. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.